But when we are talking about our Ukrainian or Syrian perspective, we see that they also can be war criminals. We'll try to find answers on this. But before we start our discussion, I'd like to give a floor to my colleague, Tatiana Katrichenko. She is an executive director of the Media Initiative for Human Rights. Together with our team, she prepared the interim report on MIHR's findings and documented facts about the Wagner Group's activities in Ukraine after the large-scale invasion. Please, Tatiana.
Anyone who needs the interpretation, please use their headsets. Well, we used to call them representatives of the Wagner Group, a specific Russian military formation, which is engaged for the protection and security of gold and oil rigs, support of governments or individual political groups. In general, the Wagner Group operates at three levels: military, economic, and political. Russia and personally President Vladimir Putin use militants to promote Russia interests and influence in the global South countries. In Ukraine, Russia, with the help of the Wagner Group, is also seeking to achieve its goal, that is, to capture the territory and to overcome Ukrainian resistance. However, the full-scale invasion of 2022 demonstrates that the localized use in Ukraine of this well-trained guards and fighters is not enough. After several defeats on the battlefield, the Russian authorities set out to achieve success in certain areas of the front line. First and foremost, we're talking about the city of Bakhmut and its surrounding areas. Let me explain for our foreign guests. Bakhmut is a small town in Donetsk region. Now, most of that region was occupied by Russia back in 2014. And now, Russia is trying to reach the administrative borders of this region. Capturing Bakhmut was a matter of principle for Russia, so they've sent the Wagner Group to Bakhmut. But we may say that it was a significant challenge to get more people to their forces, so they needed to find a very fast decision. So they decided to quickly recruit a large number of people from the prisons, and the representatives of the Wagner groups, they visited a lot of colonies in Russian Federation, and the convicts were promised with a monetary reward, clothing, food, and most importantly, they were guaranteed to receive an amnesty. On the part of the Russian Federation, these costs were significantly less significant than the cost of general mobilization to the armed forces. Besides, the promises to the convicts could not be fulfilled, and they would not protest in any case. So the first convicts who agreed to fight against Ukraine as elite paratroopers of Russia, they went to the border of Rostov region, and then they were sent to the vicinity of Bakhmut. Now, in this way, Russia seemed to find an endless human resource that could be used without regret, and that could be quickly restored, because there were always convicts in the first ranks, and they were commanded by those who had significant combat experience. I mean, those who had been recently to Syria, Libya, or Mozambique. The involvement of the Wagner Group was confirmed by the interviewed soldiers who had participated in combat operations and were captured near Bakhmut. It was from them that we've learned about numerous war crimes against prisoners of war. Starting from the August 2022 until the May of 2023, representatives of the Wagner Group, they took Ukrainian soldiers as POWs, even though it was kind of an unusual procedure for them. They've held those Ukrainian POWs on their own, they were registering them on their own, and they were compiling the list of those POWs and further provided them for the exchange. The military testified that Wagner have a special request for a certain number of POWs. The other POWs were killed. For example, they committed mass murders of unarmed soldiers who were under control. One of the witnesses said that out of 20 people who were captured by the Wagner groups, only 3 survived. The rest were laid on the ground and then shot in front of others. The others recalled that before the interrogation, they were shown 2 heads of Ukrainian soldiers mounted on a rebar, and they also said that this is Edik and this is Valera. They wanted everything in accordance to the Geneva Convention. Do you want to do the same? There's a room for the 3rd head. That's not the only known case. We know then when Wagner members demonstrated severed heads of Ukrainian soldiers. In April 2023, a video was posted on the internet showing the representatives of the Wagner groups who were cutting off the head of the Ukrainian POW. That was later confirmed by a former Wagner commander, Andriy Medvedev, who fled Russia and sought political asylum in Norway, and he was giving an interview. We also know are aware of cases of desecration of the bodies of the victims, and we describe a case when a body of one of the Ukrainian soldiers who were killed in battle, he was returned with his cut off, and the hand was smashed later on. Ukrainian soldiers tell about numerous cases of torture. Someone's hands were smashed with a hammer, someone's ear was cut off, someone was set fire alive. And different witnesses, at different times, they're saying that Wagnerivцы did this for fun. More information about the capture and detention of Ukrainian soldiers can be found in investigation in our documents, which are available on the website. And also, the Wagner have committed mass crimes against the civilian population, so we continue with the investigation of this aspect, but that topic seems far more complicated to research and investigation, but we still have to do this investigation. Why the topic is so difficult? Because the territory where Wagner operated remained occupied, and most of the residents leaving this occupied territory or the territory under control of the Russian Federation, they were either displaced deep into the occupied territories or they were taken to the territory of Russian Federation. So we don't have access to them, nor the law enforcement agencies of Ukraine have any access to them. We have many facts, and we shall be investigating them about what the Wagner Group was committing in the vicinity of the Bakhmut area. There's a public statement of the former members of the Wagner Group saying that they had an order to clear the settlements, to kill the civilians, and they could be killing up to 300 civilians in the basement of one building. And it's difficult to confirm or deny these words, but we cannot ignore them for sure, because we know that Wagnerivцы tortured and killed civilians in the global south countries. We're talking about hundreds and thousands of civilians. And what's important is that the crimes of the Wagner Group remain uninvestigated. The perpetrators have not been named, and not only because many Wagner representatives mentioned by the Ukrainian armed forces are hiding their faces behind masks. So we could only see Yevhen Prigozhin on the territory of the occupied Luhansk or Donetsk region. But primarily, this is because Wagner Group is trying to act as a separate group without a divine status, which would not be associated with the Russian government. But we know that the war in Ukraine has clearly demonstrated that Wagner Group is under the effective control of the Russian Federation, and it is the Kremlin that is responsible for every crime committed by them. In the summer of 2023, the President of Russia, Putin, said that the group was funded from the federal budget and that they've spent around $1 billion to support the Wagner Group per year. So that could be the minimum amount. There could be far more spending, and obviously the real cost may be hidden. However, over time it's becoming increasingly difficult for Russia to conceal the fact that it controls such hybrid military formations. Besides, we have witnesses, and they want to have an objective and comprehensive investigation as well as fair judgment. And not only against those people operating on the territory of Ukraine, but against those who continue to operate on the territory of the global South countries. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. You have short description of this report on your seats. Please take it with you and read it. This is really very important. And we are moving to our discussion. We have brilliant and very professional speakers today with us. I very appreciate they're willing to talk on this very difficult and sometimes even dangerous topic. So let me introduce them. Online with us virtually is Mazen Darwish, the president of the Syrian Center for Media and Free Expression. I hope Mazen is with us, yeah. Also, today with us, Umaru Polkolaga, founder and executive director of the Institute of Strategy and International Relations from Burkina Faso. Also, today with us, very brave activist and politician from Venezuela, Armando Daniel Gerardo Armas Cortin. Armando Armas, you're welcome. Also, we are very happy to have here with us Maxim Timochko, who is a prominent Ukrainian lawyer, but also he's an officer of the Ukraine Armed Forces, and now he represents the legal department of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. And also virtually, today with us is Dr. Sorcha MacLeod. She is a prominent researcher in the fields of the international humanitarian law and law of human rights. She was involved in the drafting of the Montreux document and the International Code of Conduct for Private Security Providers. So, as you see, we're going to have very interesting discussion. And as we start with those Wagner's activities on the battlefield, I would like to move to Syria, and I would like to ask Mazen Darwish to describe what happened with civilians during Wagner's activities in Syria. We know that the organization, the NGO of Mazen Darwish supported family of executed civilian. It was a very famous case in 2017. I remember how we all were shocked by this case, and before preparing this discussion, we discussed with Mazen, should we show you that video that was recorded by Wagner Group or not, and we decided that we won't shock you so much, but I think many of you remember that video, that shocking video. So, Mazen, I would like to ask you to tell us about this case, but before, maybe you can give us some background. When did Wagner Group appeared in Syria? Why did they appear there? And what were they doing? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, and I'm happy and honored to be with you and your distinguished colleague. First of all, Wagner, it's not anymore a Syrian case. We can recognize that they are working in several countries, especially in Africa and Libya. Our story as a Syrian with Wagner started in 2015, when in September, when the Russian forces decided to come directly to Syria, not only give political and armed support to the Syrian regime, but to become involved directly in the military situation on the ground. We can see the work of Wagner starting in 2016, when we are talking about the huge massacre happened in Aleppo. This is how we recognize Wagner act as a civilian, especially in the north in Aleppo. They use a different method from the classic army, and they don't have any respect for any international humanitarian law or even the war protocols. We think that they work to build this terrorist in the civilian people Aleppo, to push them to leave their village and city and their houses. This crime, this massacre done in front of the families, the women, the children, so they push people to leave and to allow them not only to defeat the military rapper, but also to make this displacement of the population in Aleppo. In 2017, especially in the desert in Tadmor, we can identify the cooperation and how the Russian army use Wagner even. And as they description, they are in the front line. Then the Russian army coming behind them. So they put them in the front when they fighting ISIS or the other rebel in Tadmor and in the desert. They don't care, they are sheep fighter, care about even their safety, so they use them. And we believe that even the problem or the fight between Wagner and the officer of the Russian army started from this battle in 2017, where we can see the Russian journalist Romanovsky, who put write in his diary about this battle and description how Prigogine and Dvornikov have this fight about blaming the Russian army not give enough weapons. In that period in 2017, Wagner leader Prigogine was very angry and feel that they use them or they don't give them enough weapons for this battle. After 2017, the most important happened, I think, in February 2018, when the Russian military pushed Wagner Group to have a fight with the American and the Kurdish authority. There is in Syria some kind of agreement that the Russian army will not cross Al-Furat River, where in the north of the Al-Furat River, the American fighter with the Kurdish group was there. As Reuters write, after have interviewed several, let me say, leader of Wagner or in the Russian group, that they feel that the Russian army cheating them. They push them to fight the American, and they told them, you will have our support and you will have Air Force covered. While when the American general contact the Minister of Defense in Russia, he said, We don't know anything about those fighters. We don't have any relation with them. And there is a huge massacre. The number, more than 200 fighters from Wagner killed and destroyed all their weapons in that day. After 2018, we can see Wagner move from the front of the battle and focusing about the financial benefit. In this period until now, Wagner have this agreement with even the Syrian government that any oil or gas or even the phosphate, they control it. They have 25% from the benefit. And the contract with the Syrian government goes for 25 years even. So this is an example how this Wagner company, how they finance themselves, how they gain from this war. In 2017, as you mentioned, there is this short video show that Wagner Group punished 7 of military Russian people laughing. They wear the uniform of Wagner. The video got from one of them and show how they are tortured one of the Syrian civilian. In November 2019, there is additional video about the same case, show how even they, I don't want to go in details, but in the end, after they torture him, kill him, they play football in his head. And with the support from Memorial and FIDH, we can even identify bunch of the suspect of those Wagner Group. We have 2 brave lawyers in Moscow. They agreed to represent us in this case. And we believe that this is very important to fight the Russian propaganda, because as you know, they always use this type of imperialism and show that they are, yes, fight for freedoms or to support those countries. We don't know how much the Russian propaganda affected the ordinary people inside Russia. So this is our target from the case, not because we think that the jurisdiction in Russia will bring the fair trial in this case, but we think it's very important when we speak to the Russian people, to ordinary people, to tell them this has happened in Moscow, in your jurisdiction. So no one can say that this is a foreign issue or a political case. This is your jurisdiction. So we start in this process in 2021. And the lawyers send the complaint to the investigation department in the federal Russia. Honestly, it's a nightmare dealing with the jurisdiction. While we think that they should protect the victim, protect our representative, but they keep postponed the case. They refuse to accept the paper for administrative reason, as they said in the first time and the second time, and we keep apply and try to bring all the details they wanted, and they go in huge and unneeded legal demand, but we succeed to apply all their demand in this way. And after several times, we try to have a decision from the Department of Investigation, and they refuse to answer our lawyer demand. Then we go to Basmani court, and we have this complaint against the investigation committee in the Russian Federal. And here, as we expected, the judge in Basmani court, A. Nikolaeva, support the investigation department in their ignoring. And in the end, and the third time, when our lawyer, Peter Zinking and Ilya Nevikov, sent a written demand, they said, we need a written decision from the court. In the end, they bring an answer from the Mr. Epachtosov. I'm sorry if I'm not saying the names in the good way, but the answer coming and said, there is no reason to open structure investigation in this case, while there is no evidence that the victim is dying. And we are talking about videotape show that in the end they cut his head and play football in his head. And for the investigation committee, they said there is not enough evidence that he's dying.
Thank you, Mazen. Sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, I think this case illustrates very well how Russian government, how Russia tries to hide the crimes committed by Wagner Group. We will come back to you. Thank you for your experience and thank you for your efforts to bring this case to the court. But we understand that we can't talk about justice itself when it comes to Russian justice, but these efforts are very important, I think, not only for Syrians, but for the whole world. But now I want us to move to another region. I think from this region, the messages about the Wagner Group appeared. I mean, the Sahel region in Africa, and particular Burkina Faso, Mali, and other countries around. And today, fortunately, we have with us Umaru Koalago, who is a well-known expert in this region in the topics of terrorism and extremism and others. And please, Mr. Koalaga, could you tell us about your perspective about Wagner Group's activities in your region? And we understand that here, when we're talking about Ukraine and Syria, it was mostly about war. But when it comes to African countries, it is very often about their commercial interests and where they where they try to secure mineral extractions and other commercial activities. So please, I know you have a presentation. Could please our technical staff to show us this presentation? And please, the floor is yours.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I would like, before starting, say that I'm very honored, to be here with brilliant speakers and with distinguished participants. So I'm coming from Burkina Faso, that is located in West Africa. And as you know, just to give us a small background of, the place where I'm coming from, Africa, just to remind, it's 54, states, 5 regions, and I'm from West Africa. And my focus in my intervention of this morning will be dealing with, as she said, the Sahel. But in the Sahel, we have 2 Sahel, not to make confusion. Then we have what we call the Great Sahel, the African Sahel, that, moves, let's say, from Sudan with Chad, Mauritania, and Burkina, Mali, and Niger. The one I will be, focusing in will be what we call the Central Sahel, okay, or the Liptako Gourmand. This is, if you make some researches, then you will see this is a new and let's say very often intervening in the different alliances. As she's also said, the founder of a think tank, and we used to work on governance and security issues. And at times, I was also, speaking on media just to make some analysis. Okay, now to go straight to the topic, let's say that Wagner in the Sahel region started in 2021 with okay.
This is
That's a background. Then it started in 2021 with Mali, because this is the region where we are, let's say, familiar with a coup, military coup. In Africa and West Africa, as I said at the very beginning, most of the countries, I would say all the countries of West Africa have experienced military coup except Senegal. Many countries, I will insist on it, 15 countries, the 14 countries have experienced military coup. Burkina, my country, is the champion with 10 coups. This is just to give you, a picture of what is happening in the region. I just wanted to show you with a map because it goes.
Sorry, we have some technical issues.
But before that, let's continue. Okay. It's not coming.
We are sorry, so you could keep talking, and I'll try to.
All right. So it was very interesting to have, the map up. Anyway, I will continue. So as I was saying that my intervention will be focusing on Wagner's activities in the region and Sahel, in the Liptako Gourmand. I'm mainly focusing on, let's say, mercenaries activities, supporting, let's say, the militaries in the region, because, alone, the thing that they're facing, an important issue, which is terrorism. And it is very difficult for these armies, to fight against. And that was a very, good, opportunity for Wagner's, to come and support these, let's say, armies. I would say Mali is so obvious because we have Wagner with this army fighting and committing, let's say, killing civilians. There are some evidences about, these issues. Okay, with Burkina, is let's say a close, let's say a collaboration, but they are not so far, fighting with, the army on the ground. Okay, with Niger, which is just, the recent country that experienced a coup, they have just started negotiations because, if you follow news from, this part of Africa, that is the Sahel region, you will see that, the regional organization ECOWAS did not accept, this last coup, because that will give opportunity to the others country also to go through this coup d'etat. And then Wagner becomes as, sort of savior angel that will, let's say, also support, this country, to go through, this situation. The perspective from the region is totally different from what you used to maybe hear. In the region, Wagner is, let's say, considered by many people, depending on the propaganda of Russian, as, a very good, experience, even at the top level. Recently, if you follow the Minister of State, one Minister of State at the United Nations General Assembly even used the term Wagner by saying that, okay, we are not, let's say, opposed to Wagner's, but for the moment, we don't have Wagner's with our army, but our fighters may be considered as Wagner. This is very surprising. And even the head of state, I was talking with, some people yesterday that consider maybe the head of state, because it's very young, is behaving like Thomas Sankara. But let me tell you that it's cheating, because in the reality is behaving like the others, okay? That, generally use, let's say, the situation with, the youth, as this program today is very extended, and then they are, maybe it's not working? Yeah. Okay, this is the map. And then you see the three countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. In green, you have, these space that covers the three countries that we call Liptako-Gourma. And this is the very epicenter of the crisis that we have in this region. You will see that the others, regions, because Burkina, we have 30 regions, there are also, some difficult issues, but these ones in the red, which has, in Mali, in Burkina, in Niger, the very, let's say, epicenter of the crisis. Now, let's move and I show you that before going forward to explain why Wagner is successful in, these three countries, because the background is not very optimistic. As you can see, armed conflict, the radicalization, violent extremism, it's very dark, picture. Transnational organized crime, weak governance, embezzlement, corruption. I will go very quickly. And today, the question of democracy, you see, from this perspective, the youth, they don't want today to listen or to speak about, let's say, election. For them, democracy is a failure. That's why, with, the propaganda of Russia, they are very successful, and they're supporting, let's say, what Russian are doing in the world, and this is unfortunate. And they are also, let's say, becomes the very fans, of this group of Wagner. You cannot even believe, because what they have been given as, let's say, narrative is far from what is the reality. That's why when I was, asked to come and speak here, I did not hesitate, because I would like just to witness and also have the very narrative from the ground, and then that maybe change the perspective, Now, the arena is very important to understand that there are many dynamics in these regions. There are challenges, but also opportunities for, let's say, international partners that now are fighting, each other just to have. And Russia is the top of these partners, and succeeded in, let's say today, giving a dark and bad image, let's say, of France, because we were colonized by France. So in Niger, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, speaking about France, talking about France is a danger. This is to tell you how far the propaganda has succeeded in, these three countries. Those who are like us, who are researchers, and then try to, let's say, bring, some analysis that is not, let's say, promoting, or let's say, not, or criticizing, the action of Russia, sometimes is a very challenge. Because today, in Burkina Faso, journalists, analysts like, what I am, sometimes if you say things that are not going in the direction of what the authorities want, praising Russia, let's say saying that election is not good, democracy is a failure, you may be taken to the ground, fight, with, the militaries. This is new in the country. So from far, I talk with some people, I'm impressed what is happening in the region, particularly in Burkina. But I can tell you without lying that it's a sad experience, because Russia has succeeded with Burkina, with Mali, and Niger, to take them in the same direction. And today, let me tell you, it's not very brilliant to be in Burkina. and then criticizing Russia. But this should be reversed, starting from today. And especially I have to bring my support to Ukraine and to all the different initiatives that will be taken so that with others, as someone mentioned here, in some platform, or let's say in groups or somewhere, we can just bring and try step by step to reverse the situation. Now, I will go very quickly. The offensive and propaganda in Africa, maybe I will not read everything, but just to give you, a picture of that. Wagner has free activities in the Sahel region. Mercenaries, as I said it, then they go to the ground. They are paid with huge amount of money. The budget of the country sometimes is very limited, and they use this money to pay, Wagners. And this is a problem, and that is, conflictual issues with the Westerners, because they do not accept and do not agree to use the money that they give to, these, poor state. I'm sorry, but this is true, to reverse this money to Wagner's as a mercenary group. The second activity is, political influence. I was speaking about these free countries, they don't want to go to election. And this is supported and, let's say, helped by Russia. They have succeeded in having a strong propaganda so that the youth today in Burkina, in Mali, in Niger, if you dare speaking about election, you become a target. This is true, and it's very sad. The other activity, the third one, is business. As we mentioned it, today, many people, especially youth, they don't understand that, Wagner's in Russia, the presence in the region is not to help them from what they think, but just to, have the natural resources. But they're also reproaching, to France and the other partners also to exploit them. And for them, Russia is not an imperialist country. It's not a colonizer. Unbelievable. But this is the real situation in the region. I will just end with the human right because, this is the topic said it's clear. Many evidences and supported by, let's say, the UN reports and with others organizations that has some figures that show that Wagner today is committing, let's say, violation of human rights. As you can see, you also mentioned it in your first report, arbitrary detention, tortures of militaries when they captured in the battlefield. Malians, especially because this is the place where they are today. The disappearance of civilians, many civilians disappear, and this is the fact of Wagner. And a summary is exchanged. Sometimes there are some pictures that I would like not to show here, but this is what is happening on the ground.
Sorry, do you have a number of disappeared civilians?
Yeah. I will. This is just. I will not. You just have a look at it. You see, it's 54% between 2021 and 2022. This is, the figure speaks alone, as you can read it. This is to show to what extent, the situation is very, let's say, threatening and very dangerous being today in the Sahel region, okay? And as you see, the money, as I was saying, invested, to these activities, that is conducted by Wagner's and especially with, Russia and behind, as you said it in your report. At the beginning, the different governments were denying, but today they are not, even they're happy to say that, the very good partner is Russia, and Wagner is a very good, partners that work well compared to the French troops, compared to the others, partners that were, let's say, but they somewhere maybe they may be right because, they did not succeed in bringing solutions, since 2015, 2012 in Mali, but in Burkina since 2000, 15, we're going through, a situation where in the country, out of 30 regions, only 2 regions today, the capital city and the second town, that is Bobo-Dioulasso, maybe, quite at ease, like we are in Kiev today. But the other regions, every day we have terrorist attacks. And then they strongly believe that Russia and Wagner, as I'm saying, I'm repeating again, for the moment, Wagner is not on the ground in Burkina Faso, but in Mali, yes. In Niger, in Burkina, they're supporting, protecting the president, the security guard. This is what is evidence. And personally, I have some proof that they are in Mali. I met them during a conference in a hotel. And in Burkina also, they're going and coming, and with, the elites that every day, are reinforcing the president. Then I'm handing by giving some recommendation. Then you can also have to see that
Very
for
brief.
me, 10 recommendation. I don't have time to read everything, but a few of them. The West should exposing the failure of corrupt regime, because this is the reality. These regimes are corrupted. They was proposing to do better than the democratic regime, but in the reality, what they are doing today is worse than what the democratic regime is doing. So this is one argument that can be used, let's say, to counter, this propaganda in the region. And the West and Ukraine normally should invest in establishing and supporting reliable local media, because I will suggest that, yes, because we are working in media issues, if you can also have the media, it's may, somewhere change things in the region. They should also I try to have some groups, composed of, let's say, think tanks and others, people that, these issues, and that also can be, so as I say, I will stop, and this is something that you may be sharing with the others. Thank you very much. But I will end with this. This is a greeting from Burkina Faso. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is so nice.
This is our flag. Yes, and a lady greeting you on behalf of Burkina Faso. And once again, I and many others, fortunately, hopefully, are supporting Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd wish we remembered about Umaru or this pretty woman when we were talking about Burkina Faso, but not Wagner Group. Unfortunately, the reality is another. Thank you very much for your perspective. This is vital for understanding of Wagner Group's activities. And now we are moving to another end of the world, to Venezuela. Armando Armas exposed Wagner Group's activities in Venezuela. And Armando, could you please share with us your findings and what are they doing there?
Hello?
Yeah, Armando also has his
I have a presentation. I was wondering if you could, you don't mind to, please? Yes. So thank you very much for the invitation. Being here is an honor. There are some of us, and I think it's growing in popularity, the view that the full-scale invasion in February last year was not a full-scale invasion against Ukraine. It was a full-scale invasion against democracy worldwide, and Ukraine happens to be the main battleground nowadays. But I come from a place that we consider also another battleground, which is Venezuela, and has its importance. And I'm sorry if I disappoint you, but I'm not going to talk that much about Wagner Group today. I'm going to talk about Wagner Group, but I'm going to talk, I want you to think critically and do some, let's say, theoretical housekeeping, and to get some important concepts clear, so we can frame the discussion in order to solve the problems. So can we, so again, I come from Venezuela. It's a very important country in the sense that it was a democracy for 40 years until Hugo Chavez arose into power in 1998, and he has started to dismantle democratic institutions from the within. So nowadays, Russia has Venezuela as one of its main allies, and they can prove, or they're trying to prove, that their model is feasible, not for development, but power-wise, I mean. So, can you play the video, please? I have a video that I want to play. Yes.
Strategic nuclear-capable bombers has just landed here in Venezuela. Wow, spectacular! Spectacular! And fighter jets are carpeting right there in the sky.
Yes, there are longer videos. If you go to the internet, way more explanatory. Actually, the president, the Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, happened to give the reception to the crew. This is a Tu-160, a Tupov. It arrived in December 2018 in Maiquetía, Venezuela. It has a capacity to bring over 100 people, 100 crew tripulation, over 100 people in the crew. If they brought Wagner, we don't know, because they do their job. They're doing it very well. And this other picture reflects. You can see phenotypically different from our phenotypes, you know, our way of looking in Venezuela. In a base of Apure, this is in the 923 Battalion of Caribes in Apure. They had some fights, and this was in 2021. They have with uprisings with claimly Colombian guerrilla and guerrilla dissidents. But what can we see? We can see here that this is a person. We don't have, of course, its passport, but it's claimly to be a Russian operative. The rifle that he has is not the same dotation, that is not the same caliber that the ones that the Venezuelan it's using, which of course were sold by the Russia bought on sport. And what I'm trying to depict in these two reflections is like the relation between Russia and Venezuela. It's in a strategic realm, but also in a tactical realm. So this is, you could claim it to be, this is in a battlefield. So this guy, this Russian, claimed to be Russian guy, was in a moment of battle between Venezuelan forces and dissident forces of Colombia. So that's the claim. It's what we call a little green man, that they appear to be in Crimea for the first time. This is our version of a little green man, because it doesn't have distinction of patches of Russian army or anything. We don't know if he can be Wagner or no, or not. But at the end of the day, those are the information that we have. So let me go back to the airplane. So after that, in 2008, this was December. The plane incident was in December 2018. In January 25th, 2019, after we had like this huge movement with the interim president Juan Guaido that claimed legitimately as the president of the National Assembly, and due to the vacuum of power for sham elections, previous sham elections, he was claimed to be like the president. So in January 2025 of 2019, it was reported by Evgeny Shavaev. I'm sorry, we're very bad about pronouncing Slavic and Russian and names, but Evgeny Shavaev, he reported that there was a unit from Wagner Group flying, apparently, or claiming to fly from Gabon and Sudan. They flew to Dakar. They stayed 2 days in Dakar, then they flew to Paraguay, from Paraguay to Havana, and from Havana they took a commercial flight to Venezuela. So a commercial flight that eventually from our national airline Conviasa, which is now sanctioned for wrongdoings, especially doing logistic activities and terrorist activities with the Iranian regime and terrorists. So this is what we know. This is what we know. So, but more than that, what I want to make the claim is, like, again, the strategic alliance of Russia and Venezuela started after 2022, 2020. So the conventions or the international treaties with Russia, which are over 200 treaties after 2022, they started with Hugo Chavez. And of course, they had continuity with Maduro, who was Hugo Chavez's former vice president, and before that, his Minister of Foreign Affairs. But as you know, we have had high-ranking Russian officials in Venezuela trying to strategize about how they can bring up their experience and their lessons learned in Syria to Venezuela. So again, what I would say is, like, in terms of war strategy, the use of military contracts are a weapon of choice, and this is something that Sean McFate and I completely recommend this book. This book was 2018 The Economist's #1 book, and now it's being read by high chief of staffs and commanders of the US and British armed forces and everywhere. I totally recommend this author, which defines mercenaries as armed civilians who are paid to conduct paramilitary operations in a foreign conflict zone. So those are basically the framework parameters. And this was the way of waging war for most of the human history. Most of human history, war was waged using private forces, private mercenaries. And only after the Westphalian Conventions, after 648, they started, and the rise of the nation state, they started to decrease. And they started to decrease, and they went into shadows, let's say, after the 1850s or something, for 150 years. And we saw, like, in a way of operations, we saw, like, their main use in South, like in Africa, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, by a company coming from South Africa called Executive Outcomes. So Executive Outcomes was like the first military company that started in Africa, mainly doing these activities, and apparently they lectured in Russia, the founders of Executive Outcomes, they lecture in Russia on how to operate this sort of companies. So there are key concepts here that we need to be aware of, like convergence, which is all the illicit activities converging with terrorism activities and converging with business, and especially in places where there's a lack of rule of law. If you go to a web page, for example, I use it a lot, called the World Justice Program. They have ranking of rule of law, and nowadays Venezuela is ranking at the very bottom. So the trend that you can see is, like, most of the time these companies operate where there's a lack of rule of law. Some of the people would say, well, yes, but there are companies that operated, for example, in Afghanistan and Iraq, sorry, I have this. Like in, oops, sorry. This is, yeah, time to wake up. Good. So, so this was a problem in the case of, for example, Blackwater and other companies, and they replicate. So, and it's claimed to be that the Russians replicated the model, saying, "Well, if the Americans are doing it, we can do it." So they are mercenaries, and we're private contract, and they do and they claim, like, they pinpointing each other. But this is, again, this is a game-changing element in how you wage war, because it's not the ideological or patriotism that is into place right now, but business and market-wise market-wise logics, you know? So if they like, these people don't fight for ideology, but for profit. So if they're in a place, it's because they're gaining profit. The objective of Russian and Latin American relations is to destabilize democracy while gaining profit. So that's why Venezuela, in this case, is so important. They have like the largest oil reserves in the world, and also diamond and many minerals, different from Cuba and Nicaragua. They are also belong to this axis, but they are not as rich as Venezuela resource-wise. So Venezuela has become like a hub for all these bad guys, Iran, Russia, and they converge there, and they have their conversations there. So military-wise, of course, you know, Russia has a lot of, they have like this Lourdes intelligence base in Havana, which was claimed shut down in 2022, but then they started to regain their activities, especially in Venezuela, Nicaragua. For the first time, this is an interesting fact. For the first time, you know, they have like these war games, these Olympic Games in Russia. For the first time ever, they took their war games geographically abroad in 2022. And Venezuela was one of the places that they took it. They did their competitions on snipers and other things in Venezuelan soil. So they are doing war games in Venezuelan soil across the Atlantic. So they are exporting the conflicts. That's why we're saying that the full-scale invasion was a war against democracy, and happens to be that Ukraine is the main battleground. Propaganda, for example, in propaganda-wise, Russia Today, Sputnik, they have something, they have a media outlet that what in the mid-2000s was created called Telesur. It was created by state-owned companies or state-owned capital from Venezuela, Ecuador, under Rafael Correa, who actually, he worked for Russia Today, having like an interview program. He's now in Brussels. I'm sorry, in Belgium, exile, from Bolivia and from Cuba. So they place they have like this trans-governmental media outlet, and they replicate all the Russian propaganda from Sputnik and from Russia Today. They adapt it culturally to the cultural needs and to the narrative, and they spread disinformation and misinformation. So what is it's interesting here is, like, for example, the YouTube channel of Russia Today in Latin America was, at least until recent researches, was even more popular, had more views, the YouTube channel, than outlets such as, let's say, CNN or BBC or whatever. So Venezuela, it's very important in Latin America because this guy, Simón Bolívar, our liberator, was, for example, by the BBC, claimed to be like the greatest hero, the greatest character of the 19th centuries in all time. So he was the guy who started the independence in South America. He came from Venezuela and he liberated, he had like this mega country that lasted for 20 years called La Gran Colombia. So it comprised Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and sometimes Panama. And it is important to the previous claim that I was saying, that it was the way, the private way was the way of war, or the mercenary way was the way of how wage war before 1815 or something. So our independence, I'm finishing here, our independence was in the 1800s, and the British were helping as space soldiers, not just training and recruiting and so on. But I'm going to finish with this claim that I read I listened 2 days ago by Hannah Hapko. What would happen if Ukraine runs out of soldiers? What would happen to the world? Because that's the strategy of Russia. They say we have more population, now we control more money, so we can. And another claim that I've been listening here is this is going to be a long war. This is going to be a long war. So let me shape a little bit, or shake the auditory, say, if you have money, you won't have to take care, you won't have to worry about running out of soldiers. Not Ukrainian soldiers necessarily. And I'm going to end with this. So here in Ukraine, there's a new initiative called the Bolivar Battalion. It's, as you said, Bolivar, I already speak about this, The commander, Jose David Chaparro, is a Venezuelan guy who came here in 1989. He was married to a Ukrainian woman, and he loves Venezuela as he loves Ukraine so much. And he's starting this initiative of an international battalion comprised of mostly Spanish-speaking combatants. But as long as you provide logistic resources, or as long as the free world is willing to wage war in a modern time with this weapon of choice, that are private military contracts, I think we do have a hope. Because, and this is a thought, after the year 2000, we thought that color revolutions would sweep the world and bring democracy on a nonviolent way. And what these guys, the authoritarian guys, realized is that they could bring again to the stage mercenaries to attack the logic of nonviolent, because the logic of nonviolence is, well, at the end of the day, military will happen defections because they don't want to hurt people in the crowd that might be their families or friends or so on. But if you don't have friends and family in the crowd because you're people bringing from abroad, and this we know in Venezuela for Cubans agents, they don't care if they're getting paid. So this is a game changer. It's a weapon of choice. At the end of the day, the question would be, if they are using this, would be morally acceptable that the free world is using it? And there are ways of doing that. I'm waiting for, and this is how I'm finishing, Professor McLeod. She has a very interesting initiative that we have read about it at the Montreal framework of how to ethically bring private military contracts into conflicts, in this case, to protect and to fight for freedom and democracy. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. I think these guys need our applause much more, please. Thanks. I think we leave it to our specific legal discussion because, yes, this is very interesting. Should we have this framework, and will Wagner Group and other Russian military companies act within this framework? So, but before we go there, I would like to return to Mr. Darwish, because I have a very specific human rights question as well. Mr. Darwish, are you with us still?
Yeah, I'm here.
Do you have this data about missing people in Syria and the areas where Wagner Group was active, and or the list of civilian hostages? Because this is also a very relevant issue to Ukraine as well. So, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. We start document since 2011, April 2011, the crime made from all parties. For the Wagner Group, unfortunately, it's not easy to identify where is Wagner crime and where is the Russian army crime. So we have one package. Sometimes we can be sure that this is Wagner Group, but it's all this crime under the intervention of the Russian army in Syria. This is well documented, but again, sometimes it's not easy to identify and or to be more specific who's Wagner militia and who's the official Russian army. But we have very good data in this regards. This is also one of the evidence present to the European Human Rights Court, because after, in this case specifically, after it's a block in Russia, we take the case to the European Court for Human Rights. And let me say that justice and accountability take long time. And maybe for the victim, it's stated that they can't find a practical result directly. but documentation, it's essential for justice. So this is one of the most important things. We start working in it from the day first. And we believe that even later, we know from our experience in the massacre in 1982, there is between 20 up to 40 civilian killed in Syria, and we don't have any data. It's now just a story tell between the generation, but we don't have solid data about this crime. But also documentation is very necessary to save the narrative. We knew that how the propaganda, how the Russian present their intervention in Syria as ISIS or the extremism, and they are fighting for freedoms and for the state ability. All this propaganda, documentation, is very important to save the narrative, to tell the Syrian and even the new generation what exactly happened in Syria, how the Russian government used this Wagner Group to make this war crime and crime against humanity, but also how it's the war economic, how they benefit directly from this, as my colleague in Venezuela said.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And so, as I announced, we are moving to legal issues, and I'd like to give a floor to Maxim Timochko. He has his own perspective about Wagner's activities in Ukraine. So, Maxim, you've heard what Armando told, and yeah, so what do you think? Because I know that your thought is that Wagner Group should be considered as a terroristic organization. What do you think about this idea about legal framework for the PMCs?
Good morning, dear colleagues. Well, I really like Armando's presentation, especially the last slide. That was great. Thank you. A few introductory words, and I will, because I haven't seen you for a long time, and so a few introductory theses. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this conference. It's a great pleasure for me to be here too, and especially for the team of Media Initiative for Human Rights. I've read all of your reports, to be honest, and I found it very supportive and contributing to the law enforcement of Ukraine, and I believe even for the international institutions. And thank you for that. Today I represent the legal department of MOD, but that means that I'm serving in MOD right now. But all my thoughts that I will discuss today is not the official position of the MOD. This is a very important reservation. And well, partly because MOD and Armed Forces of Ukraine are not law enforcement agencies. And a lot of topics which raised in this discussion actually should be forwarded to my colleagues from the Prosecutor's Office General and from the Security Service of Ukraine, National Police, who directly faced with the problems in question, because they faced with the problems of status and so on. And I think that the topic of this conference should be even broader than just Wagner Group. This is what my colleagues mentioned before. Well, because a few months ago when this conference, when this panel were even just planned, yes, the state of Wagner Group and their role in the conflict, they were really huge, and that was so huge that they even allowed themselves to make a riot against the armed forces of Russian Federation and security forces of Russia. Well, this riot over by the Wagner's defeat, but that was really strong power, and but now the situation has changed dramatically, and all of these members of Wagner Group, they scratched amongst between the Africa and Belarus and Russia and Ukraine. Someone back to Ukraine to fight, to continue this fighting on the Russian side. Some of them concluded the contract with the armed forces of Russia because that was exactly what the Ministry of Defense announced, that because they lost the control over the Wagner Group and they want to compel them to make contracts with the armed forces of Russia Federation. So they fully integrated right now into the enemy armed forces. So, but it's not reduced the relevance and actuality of our discussion, because we are not talking about Wagner Group. We are talking about the Russian narrative, about the Russian aggressive policy. We're talking about hybrid warfare, and the using of so-called private military companies is just one of the instruments, one of the small methods of providing this aggression worldwide. And I think that the question of Wagner, it's not a question about the military companies. So because it is not a military company at all. It just labeled it as this private military company, but it's just a group of insurgents. And some experts declare that it could be labeled as the network, some like network of organized armed group which operate in Africa, in South America, and in Ukraine. So it's a very huge organization, and maybe it's not a very well-structured organization at all. Well, and talking about their status, so we faced with this since 2014. So a lot of discussions were about their status, about the approaches, how to bring them to the accountability, because they were hugely documented to be involved in the mass atrocities like extrajudicial killings, tortures, forced disappearance, rape, sexual and gender-based violence, and so on and so on. And Tatiana today talked about that briefly. And so there are a few questions which arise during these discussions. First of all, are they combatants, or maybe they are mercenaries, or they're terrorists, and so on. So, and this is a very tricky question for me, because probably before large-scale invasion, I would say that no problem with that, they are just terrorists, they participate in the terroristic organization and so on, they could be liable according to the Criminal Code of Ukraine. But now the situation is a bit more complicated after large-scale invasion. Because let's start from the combatant status. Yes, Russia and Ukraine is the part of additional protocol first to the Geneva Convention. And this protocol prescribes a very, very broad concept of the combatants, because it says that the armed forces of the state parties consist of all organized armed groups, units, forces, which are under command, responsible before the party for the conduct of their subordinates. So very, very broad concept of the combatants. And that means that to a certain extent, the Wagners meet the criteria according to the additional protocol. And partly this is true because there are a lot of evidence of effective control of Russia over the Wagner Group. For instance, because equipment, because ammunition, because weapon, because, as Oля mentioned today, because of financing of the Wagner Groups, the logistics, of course. But Putin recognized the financing of the Wagner Groups only in June 2023. He declared that Russian budget spent a lot of billions of dollars for financing the Wagner Group. But after a few days after that, he declared that Wagner Group does not exist legally in Russia because national legislation of Russia does not prescribe the existence of private military companies. So this is ridiculous, but this is the narrative of Russia Federation. Anyway, there are a lot of evidence which prove the effective control over the Wagner Group, and that support the indication that they probably should be combatants during the international armed conflict. But before 2022, the situation was different because Russia did not recognize, and even now does not recognize, but at that time definitely did not recognize the existence of international armed conflict. And of course, the law enforcement of Ukraine, without any problems, could prosecute them as participants of the terroristic organization or participants of so-called quasi-republics, Donetsk People Republics and Lugansk People Republics, in what they were involved in their irregular forces. Well, but now we see that the practice of Ukrainian government is tend to recognize them as the combatants. Well, because the reason is very pragmatic and reasonable. We need them for exchange fund. We need them to release our people from the enemy captivity. We don't have enough resources to investigate all of their activity in the terrorist groups or something. The only priority now is to investigate and to bring to accountability the war criminals and other international criminals. And that is why now our law enforcement concentrates mostly with this type of crimes. And I think rightly so. We need it to do so. Of course, it would be great to every time to label all Wagners as a terrorist, as militants, to inform our state partners from Africa, from South America, from Europe, that this guy, he fought for Wagner Group and he realized that he fought for the terroristic organization. That would be great to provide such qualification, but this is my opinion. I'm not providing the law enforcement policy in Ukraine. Well, this is regarding the combatants. Of course, I have another point of view because my point of view based mostly on the ethical and moral principles, because I think that international humanitarian law and all this stuff about the combatants, they designed for the parties of the conflict which provide the conduct of hostilities in a good faith. When you recognize that somebody is your fighter and you said that, okay, you should provide him a prisoners of war status, this is how the parties should conduct their hostilities, even during war, even when one of the state is an aggressor. But Russia never recognized the Wagner as the part of their armed forces, despite we know that they are in the informational, operational space with the armed forces of Russia Federation. They conduct hostility as a joint forces, so they are fully integrated in the Russian armed forces. But despite that, Russia never recognized officially that they fight for Russia and that they are the part of their armed forces. So it's a very problematic question, but the practice is that we recognize as the combatants. The second issue is, are they mercenaries? We always say that they are mercenaries. And when we provide in any interview, we said they are mercenaries, but that means only that this is about the negative connotation about the Wagner Group. Because they fight for money, and that is why they become mercenaries. But from the legal point of view, of course, they could be mercenaries in Burkina Faso, in Mali, they could be mercenaries in Venezuela, because they overthrow in the government, they undermine in the constitutional order in that countries, and they fight for money. But during the conflict, of course, according to international law, according to the additional protocol to Geneva Convention, I'm sorry, I'm repeating that again and again, they are not mercenaries legally because they are mostly residents of Russian Federation. And they have citizens of Russia, especially convicts people who recruited from jails.
We have not much time left, so please.
I prepared a very long speech.
I'm so sorry about that, but...
Anyway, some of them might be a mercenary, but only foreigners. If some guy came from Venezuela and fight on the side of Russia, it could be a mercenary. But all of that Russians, Wagner Group's participants, mostly they are Russian citizens, therefore they are not mercenaries legally. Okay, I have to finish, and probably I will join when we will answering the questions. Okay.
Yeah, I wish we had a Q&A session, but unfortunately we had very less time. So we're going to Dr. Saoirse MacLeod, professor. Are you with us?
Yes, I am. I'm here. Are you able to hear me?
It's nice to hear you. So, a very short question. I'm not sure if you had everything we talked before, but we have a very short question to you. Do you believe that some legal framework for PMCs could make such units as Wagner or networks as Wagner groups make them accountable for their crimes, for their activities, and or maybe it will make accountable some state who is creating such units.
That's a tricky question, because there is, of course, an international framework in place. Is it okay if I share some slides to go through the legal framework? Because we have to be very careful from a legal perspective in terms of what we're talking about. And I just want to say, I'm sorry I can't be with you there in Kiev today. I'm currently traveling and I'm in an airport, so I apologize if there are any announcements. So I've heard some of the previous speakers talking about the impacts of mercenaries and mercenary-related actors in a variety of different armed conflicts, and specifically the Wagner Group. But it's also important to understand that what the Wagner Group has been doing is part of a broader systemic increase in the number of mercenaries and mercenary-type actors that are being used in multiple armed conflicts around the world. So we see them in Libya, we see them in Central African Republic, in Mali, in Syria, in the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, and of course in Ukraine, and that they're being used specifically as proxy actors for states that are not officially a part of an armed conflict to become involved in the armed conflict and to circumvent responsibility and accountability for their actions. And so it's not just Russia that is doing this. We're also seeing countries like Turkey, for example, using this approach. And what that has, what we've also seen is, and there's been a couple of references to it from the previous speakers, is that we've seen a substantial shift in recruitment practices. So historically, mercenaries were very specific type of individual. They were very often ex-military personnel, certainly individuals who had some sort of military or fighting experience. But one of the things that we've been seeing recently is that there has been an expansion into recruiting people who don't necessarily have that background, but who come perhaps from a conflict-affected country such as Syria, or they're being recruited from prisons. We heard about Russia recruiting from Russian prisons. And that is also problematic because instead of seeing small numbers, maybe a few dozen mercenary type actors being deployed, we're seeing hundreds and sometimes tens of thousands of individuals being recruited. And it's also creating an additional layer of victimization, because in some instances, while some of these recruits have been recruited willingly, and they're being recruited for financial gain, and they want to fight, many others are being coerced or put under duress to fight, or they're being induced by offers of citizenship, for example. And in those circumstances, what's actually happening is we're creating people who are being exploited for the purposes of mercenarism, and it's a form of human trafficking. And the third sort of contextual issue is that when these actors are deployed in armed conflicts, they prolong the conflicts, and that has an additional negative impact for civilian populations. That increases the likelihood of violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. And again, as we've heard some of the speakers say, from the working group on mercenaries perspective, we've received information about substantial violations of human rights, massacres, torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, forced disappearances, arbitrary detention, widespread sexual and gender-based violence, looting, and in some cases, the targeting of civilians and the other violations amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Now we have to be very careful here when we talk when we use language. The only language that is legally defined is mercenary. So when we talk about private military companies or private military and security companies, private security companies, none of those terms have a legal definition. The only actor that is defined under international law is mercenary. And it's helpful to think about these actors as being on a spectrum, because we've increasingly seen states outsourcing security or private security and private military services to the private sector, but it ranges from peacetime situations into full-blown conflict situations. And we do have to be very precise about the application of the definition and the application particularly of the definition of mercenary. So we've heard reference to the Geneva Convention Additional Protocol 1, which contains the definition of mercenary. It only applies to international armed conflicts, so that would of course mean that it would apply to the Ukrainian conflict, but it would not necessarily apply to the conflicts in Mali or in Libya or in Central African Republic, because they are on the face of it non-international armed conflicts, notwithstanding the fact that there are proxy actors in the form of Wagner or other mercenary type actors acting on behalf of third-party states. They are, in essence, non-international armed conflicts. And the definition of mercenary is a very, very narrow one, and it's very difficult to actually meet the criteria of mercenary. And so the first three elements are inclusive, so you have to have been recruited specifically to be a mercenary and to fight in an armed conflict, and that you do in fact take a direct part in hostilities. Now this is a very controversial element, and this is where we see a big schism between states. So there are states which take the view that the definition of direct participation in hostilities means that you're actually engaged in the fighting. So if you were merely providing some sort of military service that falls short of combat services, fighting in a conflict, that would mean that you are not you're not a mercenary. So there's a lot of controversy at the international level about what does direct participation in hostilities mean. And then we've got the idea that you have to have been motivated, not just by private gain. It's not just any private gain. The definition says you have to have been promised substantially more in terms of money than you would get, or some other form of compensation that you would get if you were a member of the regular armed forces. And so we don't necessarily always see that. And in any event, it's very subjective. How do we determine what somebody's motivation actually is? Very, very subjective. And then we have three excluding elements. You cannot be a national of a party to the conflict, nor a resident of territory controlled by a party to the conflict. And of course, this is very relevant in the Ukrainian context, because if you are a Ukrainian national or a Russian national and you are fighting for the Wagner Group, then you would not be defined as a mercenary under the Geneva Convention. If the recruits have been incorporated into the armed forces of a party to the conflict, again, that would mean that they were not considered to be a mercenary. And that's something that we've seen more states doing in different conflicts, that they incorporate the recruits into their military. And then finally, the final excluding factor, and this is the one that probably applies particularly to the Sahel region, is where individuals have been recruited and sent by a state which is not a party to the conflict on some sort of official duty. And so this of course is to make sure that peacekeepers, for example, are not included. But it's also why we see Russia, for example, describing the individuals that have been sent to places like Mali and to Central African Republic as being sent there as instructors or trainers, and that they therefore are outside the international legal definition of mercenary. There are two other important international legal frameworks when it comes to the legal framework. We have the African Convention and the International Convention, both of which criminalise mercenarism and expect states to put in place mechanisms at the national level to address the recruitment, the training, the financing of mercenarism, and they don't require direct participation in hostilities. But none of these instruments really address the issue of accountability in any deep way. So while a state that is a party to these instruments would be required to put in place, say, criminal prosecution of mercenaries or those who are involved in the recruitment and training and use of them, it doesn't necessarily mean that victims get any sort of access to justice or accountability. I'm going to, we can look at how states have addressed mercenarism at the national level. It's very piecemeal. It's not ideal from an accountability perspective, and really there's a huge gap there. So just two final slides on accountability and access to justice for victims. What we've seen, despite the Wagner Group and the UN Working Group has been working on Wagner since 2018, we have seen only one successful prosecution of Wagner operative, and that was in June of this year, where an individual from Kyrgyzstan was prosecuted under the Kyrgyzstan Criminal Code, which prohibits and criminalises mercenarism, but we've also seen an attempt by the family of a victim allegedly tortured and murdered in Syria by Wagner operatives. The family was unable to get any sort of access to justice in the Russian investigative committee process, and there were major obstacles put in the way of these individuals, even though the Russian criminal code prohibits mercenarism, and Russia has told the Working Group on Mercenaries that the outsourcing of these kinds of activities is prohibited under Russian law. Root causes have to be addressed. This is a fundamental aspect of any kind of human rights approach to mercenarism. We have to understand why people might be motivated to join in mercenary activities. With the Wagner Group, there are additional aspects associated with neo-Nazism and the idea of the creation of greater Russia. So there are motivations beyond mere financial motivations. And I've already mentioned that we're seeing people in conflict-affected areas being taken advantage of, people in prison being recruited, and all of those things are hugely problematic when it comes to the use of mercenaries. In terms of accountability, it's absolutely fundamental that states address the legislative and governance gaps. More states do need to ratify and criminalise mercenarism, the recruitment, the training, the financing of mercenarism, and they need to make sure that there are mechanisms in place beyond simple prosecution to ensure that victims get access to justice. And we do need to be looking at considering adopting universal jurisdiction mechanisms, but that's of course up to individual states to determine whether they want to allow their courts to prosecute individuals for war crimes and crimes against humanity that have occurred outside of their territory.
Dear Sorcha, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Unfortunately, our time runs out. And thank you. We are so grateful for your very valuable contribution to our discussion. I'm so sorry we don't have no much time. We have no much time left for our Q&A session, but you can discuss everything later on during the breaks. Now we are going to have one announcement from Felix Marat. No, we won't. Okay. Then we have the another panel right now. I thank you very much for your perspectives, for your speeches. It was very, very interesting, I think, for the audience as well. Thank you.